That jarring cacophony can only mean one thing. You're back with the Power of Three podcast. The podcast that goes throughout space and time and space, as we try to bring you exciting, or sometimes just interesting, Doctor Who content. I'm Kenny Smith, and today we're definitely bringing you something that's interesting and exciting. Well, I think so, as we're taking a look at the latest release from Obverse Books' Black Archive series. Yesterday we're looking at release number 78, which looks at the 15th Doctor adventure, The Devil's Chord. Let's have a quick look at the back cover and see what it says. I thought that was non-diegetic. The Devil's Chord 2024, 15th Doctor Ncuti Gatwa's first journey into history, shows the Beatles eking out a living in a world that has turned its back on music. This book explores the band's work, their historical context, and the importance of music to human culture. It explains why and how Doctor Who made a Beatles episode featuring none of the Beatles' music, and asks whether the central character can really hear the series soundtrack. Now, this book has just been published, and it has been written by a friend of the podcast, I think we can call him that, Dale Smith, and he's going to tell us all about it now.
I'm Dale Smith, and I've written a Black Archive on The Devil's Chord.
You have indeed, but of course this is not your first Black Archive.
This is my fourth Black Archive, so I've done Talons of Wang Chian, Greatest Show in the Galaxy, and Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead.
Which is quite a diverse mix, particularly when you add in Devil's Chord.
Yeah, well, at the minute I'm the only one to have done a Ncuti Gatwa one as well, so I'm getting a good mix. I'm not one of those people who wants to do one for every Doctor, but I'm quite happy with what I've got so far.
So what made you choose The Devil's Chord?
It was watching it. So the editor of the range, Philip Sahalad, said that it was the shortest amount of time between transmission and someone making a pitch that they'd ever had, because as soon as I watched the episode, I knew there was a Black Archive in it, and I knew there were different things to say about the story. So I just got in touch with him that evening and said, has anyone claimed this one, and would you be interested in looking at a pitch for it?
So what was it that inspired you in the episode to make you think this is worth going into and going into depth about?
So mostly it was Russell T Davies coming back, because I've been worried that he was coming in to do a lap of honour and it wasn't going to be as good and successful and new as it should be with a new showrunner. And so I watched the first two episodes when they went out and just went, oh yeah, he's doing something new, he's doing something interesting, he's here to reinvent what Doctor Who is. And I wanted the opportunity to talk about him doing that and how he was doing that, because it was, people were hoping that he was going to turn the whole ship away from everything that happened before and do something brand new and interesting like he had when he did Rose. And what he did instead was reach back into everything that had happened and retool it and refigure it so that he could tell a new story that was still really embedded in it being Doctor Who. And that was just fantastic. And then there was the stuff about the Beatles in there, and I knew the Beatles have a long history with Doctor Who that had never really been talked about in the Black Archive before, and that could be interesting. And lots of stuff about AI, which I was just burning to rant about at length.
Yes, I noticed very clearly that right at the start of this archive, it states very clearly, and I'll get the exact wording, no form of AI has been used in the creation of this book.
Yes, that is something that the publisher always puts in their books now, just to make it absolutely clear. But the dedication of the book as well is to a list of names that should make any AI that tries to ingest the book stop, because they're people who've all sued the big OpenAI people for defamation from things that LLMs have said about them. So, just making sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if we go through the book just in the various sections, so there's 5 sections there. So we start off with the Beatles in the 60s, and it's, as always with a Black Archive, there's lots of lovely references, and a book that's mentioned quite a lot is Love and Let Die.
Yes, so it was that book that was one of the main inspirations for the Beatles side of it, which is John Higgs's last book before he started talking about Doctor Who, which unfortunately didn't come out in time for me to read it and see what he thought about that. But his premise is that Bond and the Beatles are the 2 driving forces of the 20th century, and you can chart what's happened in society from the way those 2 properties interact and bump up against each other. And obviously, being a Doctor Who fan who knows that Who's been going just as long as those 2 have, I wanted to point out that we also had a role to play in that. If the Beatles are the extreme on one side of being about love and youth and acceptance, and Bond is the far side talking about history and following the rules and killing people, then Doctor Who has gone right down the middle of that path and sometimes leans one way, sometimes leads another, but has pretty much stayed in the middle until in the 21st century it very much came out on the side of love and acceptance and everybody being equal.
Yeah, I think that it's fascinating sort of just reading it, sort of having a look at where Britain stood in the world at that point, that sort of post-empire phase, and and pretty much what we regard as the birth of popular culture in a lot of ways is in there.
Yeah, for me, it all seems to come from the Suez Crisis, which is the moment where everything all combined into one event on the world stage that really pointed out that Britain had changed, wasn't the country that it was anymore, didn't have the influence that it had anymore, and that the powers that be that were running the country were out of touch and didn't know how to behave in this new world that was forming. And with that break in the old traditions, that's provided the ground that people like the Beatles could grow out of and start questioning how things had already been done before and build a new world that is still influencing us today.
Yeah, it's fascinating just to see the influence of music in that, whereas here are the young people voicing their frustrations at what's going on with the older ones who are not with it, to use the 60s vernacular, and pushing back through the form of music and getting some just absolute all-time classic songs out there.
Yeah, I wanted to go into it more if I'd have been doing a podcast instead of a book. I think it probably would have included a little bit about jazz as well, because they were the original people who started breaking the mold and going against what society was saying. But I already had to trim out a large amount of talking about Britain's history. I couldn't really justify going into jazz history as well.
Yeah, of course, it's not just the Beatles who are in there. We've got Cilla Black as well.
Yeah, Cilla had an important role to play in The Devil's Chord, because even though she only had a small part, she was the one that told you what was going on, had a wider scope than just affecting the Beatles. And because of her history with the band before she grew up in the same place, she knew them, was friends with people who were friends with them, was friends with them. She was the obvious candidate for RTD to choose as being his second incident of things going wrong, so that the viewer was really sure that the world was breaking, and it wasn't just that somebody was messing with the Beatles, or we were just there to see the Beatles record it and the Doctor was going to change what they were doing so it went the way we know. So yeah, she was an interesting character to talk about. There's not a huge amount written about her, despite how involved in the Liverpool scene she was. So the main source of information for that was her autobiography, which you do have to take with a pinch of salt at certain points, because she was very much writing a book that was settling scores and presenting her side of the story. So it was interesting here and there just to see where that contradicted where she cropped up in other people's stories and got mentioned.
Yeah, it was fascinating just to see it sort of, you've got this context of what's happening in Britain, and indeed, as you mentioned, with things like the Suez Crisis, and just how Doctor Who is sort of this line that's going through it and what's happening. And then move on to the second section. You can't use a single note.
Yes, so that was the chapter that wasn't part of the original pitch, and it came about because I fell down a rabbit hole when I was writing in brief about the use of the Beatles music in the show before, and I'd written a lovely little section of a chapter that just said they're not used anymore on the iPlayer or on the DVD releases because you can't get the rights for them, and like Russell T Davies said, it just costs too much to get Beatles music. And then someone pointed out to me that the music you can hear in the background on the iPlayer for Remembrance of the Daleks is the Beatles, and it broke my brain a little bit. So I had to dig into that and just find out why it was there when it had been removed from everything else. So the Beatles on the Evil of the Daleks on the iPlayer and in the Chase aren't there. They've been removed for rights reasons. And I needed to know why they were still on Remembrance of the Daleks and why no one was suing anybody. So it turned into a whole chapter, and I managed to track down Mark Ayres and talk to him about what it was. I still haven't managed to get a definitive answer out of everyone because it's all legal stuff and they're not allowed to tell me. But I think I've got it clear enough in the book what actually happened and why you can hear the Beatles on some things and not on others.
It's really quite scary, just how complex these rights issues are for, you just want to include a song, but just with all these copyrights, and I know through journalism and such, like how difficult it can be to even like to quote something at times without receiving a letter, if you're doing longer parts. So yeah, it's a fascinating area which I really enjoyed going through it, and I think having Mark Ayres on hand, who's a man who makes the incredibly complex incredibly simple at times. He's very good that way.
Yes, and he's always been really helpful to people who are doing Black Archives as well. He's very, very busy, but he will usually respond to any question that somebody manages to get to him, as long as you've got the time to wait for it. And
yeah,
he remembers everything, so he's really useful.
Section 3, The Day the Music Died, and it's a fascinating look at music and how it sort of moves a Doctor Who story along.
Yeah, so that was the one where it was talking. It started off talking about Maestro and her plan and whether you could actually destroy the human race by taking music away from them. And in doing that, you have to go into the history of music and see where it came from, evolutionary, and what function it plays in our society. And at the end of the day, you do sort of go, yeah, that plan would work, actually. That's something you could do that would completely alter society if you took music away from us. And obviously, there's the theme in the story about how taking that music away is related to AI and everything that's going on at the minute with computers that will generate music for you just from a prompt, and it sounds like real people, but it's not quite. And it's a complicated thing in the show because Maestro is the god of music, and their first act is to free music from somebody who couldn't make it. And that's a really interesting idea when you're talking about AI, which is taking music away from us, and just working out why he made that decision to make Maestro work in that way rather than just have them turn up and steal all the music was an interesting journey to go down.
Yeah, and Maestro, of course, is an absolute force of nature. once they've appeared. And it's interesting, I think, putting something that's very much a part of 2020's culture with drag culture into that 60s explosion of colour and sort of almost like the early big screen campery or small screen campery with what we got with the Avengers. And it's such an interesting juxtaposition putting the two together.
Yeah, the modern drag has a lot in common with all of the stuff that was going on in the 60s, so I can really see why he made that decision to combine the two. And it's all coming out the same idea of society needs people on the outskirts who go, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why do you keep doing that even though it doesn't seem to be working? And just looking at things and questioning them and being outrageous and different and visible.
Yeah, I was just reading this chapter in particular. I thought this would actually make a really good podcast where you could drop in musical examples to illustrate what you're saying.
Yeah, the whole book would really benefit from being able to play some of the music and go, listen to this. This is what this is doing. But Andrew Hickey's got a podcast which is doing something very similar, just about the Doctor Who references. And if that's the kind of thing you want, I would highly recommend that.
I was thinking Spotify playlist.
Yes, yeah, maybe, yeah.
I think it's fascinating, just sort of the way that music plays such an important part in Doctor Who. I mean, I think it's highlighted in particular during that scene on screen when there is no sound, and you realise just how much a part of the mix that it is.
Yeah, especially with the modern show, which has music pretty much all the way through it, unless it's making a specific point, like that silent scene, which was really powerful and good. The way that Russell T Davies uses music and brings it into the fabric of the show and uses the word diegetic, which, you know, but it's music that the characters can hear and is happening there, and it's also music that isn't specifically written for the show that's being used as the background music. He brings pop music and new and interesting choices into it in a way that also leans back on things like the Beatles being played in the background back in the 60s. It's a really interesting use of legacy and modernisation at the same time.
Very much so. And talking of legacy, you get the chance to touch on the radiophonic workshop in there as well, which I thought was lovely, being a big part of that 60s sound, just being so different to what we were getting anywhere else.
Yeah, the theme tune in particular, because it gets played diegetically in the story, it's a really good place to talk about that. And one of the things that we always forget as fans is just how strange and unusual and weird that piece of music is, and how it came out of the avant-garde of the 60s. And it was being made by people who were trying to break out of the mold of what music was and how you made it by cutting up bits of tape or recording weird sounds and slowing them down and manipulating them, or using computers to make pure tone noises that they then manipulated. And it all sort of ties in with the idea of computers that make music and how you can use them for the good.
Then in the next section, I thought that was non-diegetic, which was great. Just looking at the actual difficulties in terms of getting access to Shooty, how it starts off, and mixing around his other work commitments.
Yeah, so the one thing that you notice about Russell T Davies coming back is that he's made the show what people are calling very postmodern, because it's got a lot of people breaking the fourth wall and instances where the Doctor talks to us or Mrs. Flood talks to us. All of that does tie in with the fact that Shooty wasn't immediately available, and so we got those David Tennant specials where he decided to go back and address the dangling threads that he left from that era when he left last time, and just the whole idea of going back and redoing and being open about that to the audience and pointing things out. It's an interesting area to talk about because Doctor Who has always done things like that, and Tom Baker was always looking at the camera and grinning at us or chatting to us. And there's been this long-running fan conversation about whether or not the character of the Doctor knows he's in a TV show. And Russell T Davies in The Devil's Chord just ends that conversation immediately and goes, yeah, he does, he knows.
And we get it blatantly on screen in Lux as well.
Yeah, so that one I mentioned in the archive because it was I'd written the whole thing. We'd done a couple of passes of reviewing it and revising it, but the publication date that we'd chosen then happened to be right at the end of season 2, and so we had to wait and watch the whole thing and try and work in anything that was relevant that we saw coming out of that, and then get it all in so we could still hit the publication date. And obviously, talking about postmodernism in one of the chapters, that scene did leap out and go, hello, look at me, you need to talk about me. But it's interesting because that scene he does give a diegetic explanation to. He does say, no, they're just, the gods have created them and they're looking like they're people from our universe talking about Doctor Who, but not really. It's fine. Whereas in The Devil's Chord, there is no other way of explaining the Doctor saying, I thought that was diegetic, than that he knows it's in a TV show and he can hear the soundtrack.
I'm not a fan of Doctor Who fans appearing in the show, I have to say. That I didn't like that bit in Lux. I know lots of people loved it, hated it, but that's just my personal opinion.
Maybe that's the running thread between my ones, because I did The Greatest Show as well, which had a Doctor Who fan in it.
Yeah, Greatest Show, of course, yes, with WizKids and Jen Samarco. So. Now, of course, the chapter Beatles versus Stones is fantastic. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to quote just the opening lines. There has never been a better time for Doctor Who to take us back to the 1960s. In many ways, doing so demonstrates just how much we never really left. And I think that really, really sets tone, and it is so absolutely true.
Yeah, so doing a Shooty Gatwa Black Archive, I knew it couldn't be a Black Archive like most of the other ones have been done, because all of the ones that have been done previously really rely on a bit of distance between the show being on and us talking about it. Even when I was doing the Stephen Moffat one, there had been long enough for a lot of information about the making of those stories and things that happened afterwards that you can look back and say in hindsight were part of that mix, like River Song's story. You can't do that doing one on The Devil's Chord because there just hasn't been the time for any extra information to come out. So I knew it was going to be more in the moment than the Black Archives have really done before, and I really wanted to talk about what is going on at the minute with fandom and the new series of Doctor Who, and how the fact that it's so obviously changed again and is seeking a different audience to what it had when Chris Chibnall left it, that it was something that was interesting to talk about. And in the context of that show, it worked because you've got the Beatles and the Stones there, and you can make the comparison between the Beatles, who have gone on to be the most culturally dominant band in the world, and the Stones, who were around at the same time, who a lot of people preferred, who in some ways made better music, certainly than Obladi Oblada, but that was it was interesting to use that as a metaphor to talk about the way Doctor Who fans of the old series and the new series and the new series all look at this same thing and decide what it is and how it works and what's going on. And the main thrust of it is that RTD knew as a fan that all of that was going on and it was going to happen when he came in. And so he gave us a look back into the most popular era, recreated it, did it again, did it new, did it brilliantly, and then moved on to get his new audience while also building in lots of escape routes for people who still want to be Doctor Who fans but don't like watching the current version of it. And you can have Big Finish doing new Doctor Who stories with new Fifth Doctors, new Sixth Doctors, because of all the bi-generation stuff that he built into it. And it's a really lovely way of opening everything up and allowing everybody to play in the same playpen without having to have any fights.
Yeah, you might just glare at each other and shout, but you don't need to go and punch somebody else in the nose. Yeah. Now, also, the thing that really impressed me is the level of research you've done in here, because there are so many different sources being quoted, even right up to date with I think there's a Daily Mirror story from May this year being quoted. So it just shows the level of work that goes into it. So tell us about how you start and plan out a book like this.
So the initial thing is the pitch, where I usually break it down into about 5 chapters because I know that will give me enough room in each one to talk about something. So I need 5 ideas related to the story that I can have a number of things to say about, and there aren't all that many Doctor Who stories that I have those 5 ideas about, so there's a limited pool of Black Archives I can write. The pitch separates out those 5, and then for each 5 I like to have 4 or 5 points in them that explain what I'm going to talk about in a way that the editors can understand and decide whether it's something they want to publish a book about. Once that's done, there is a period of reading that goes on for a very long time. But the process I tend to use now is that as I'm reading books or articles or watching films, I'll be writing their sections in the book and then stitching them all together at the end when I know all of the facts that I need to get in to make the point that I'm trying to make. So this version of it, at the same time I was writing Paradise Towers book for Obverse as well. So in the day I was writing the Paradise Towers books and watching that and working out how that all worked and coming up with language. And then in the evenings I was reading about the Beatles in the 60s and the 50s and AI, and both of them managed to bounce off of each other in ways that you probably can't tell that they were being done at the same time. But yeah, it's a lot of reading and writing down little scraps of things, and then the main work at the end is trying to stitch them back together in a way that it's not obvious. But it also meant that the whole structure of this one changed as I was going, because of that rabbit hole I fell down, taking up a whole chapter, and nobody involved in the production, I suspect, was allowed to talk to me, but certainly nobody wanted to. And so that meant a lot of the background stuff that I was hoping could be in there wasn't available to me. So the appendixes at the end of the book were meant to be sections of the first 2 chapters, and by the time I was going to stitch everything together, they just would not go back in. So they slid out at the end because they're still fun little bits to have. But it was the only bit of it that remained as I said it was going to be from the pitch, was that last chapter, which was just going.
You did mention earlier on about jazz, so yes, this book was quite free-flowing in its own way then.
Yes, indeed. And it's also, I think, the biggest one I've written. It's certainly thicker than all the other ones on my shelf. So there's a lot of stuff crammed in there, but there was also a lot of stuff that was taken out, which at some point I'm sure I'll do a blog post or something that's got the bits that I had to cut out just to make it down to size.
And there's some fascinating stuff right at the end, just when you're looking at Doctor Who in context as to where it sits now in 2025, with no news on a Disney renewal and things like that. And is the show going to continue? And I think it's a really nice conclusion. It's perfect time, and it's a really good read for those who are thinking, what on earth's going on just now in Cardiff?
Yeah, I think it's clear to everybody that no one can say what's going to happen next at the minute, because the Disney deal hasn't officially ended, and it does look like it's going to end, but it hasn't yet, and so no one can go, and this is what we're going to do next. So there is a lot of worried chatter that's going on in that vacuum, and writing a chapter that's about what's going on now, that has to be addressed. But the conclusion of it is there is no way the BBC will stop making Doctor Who at the minute. Something will have to go very badly wrong with it for them to walk away from it now.
Yeah, the fact it's such a financial windfall it creates, whatever they spend on creating it, they certainly more than make their money back in sales.
Yes, certainly for me.
Yeah, and merchandising and everything else. So Blu-rays, oh gosh. I said merchandising, I don't say merch. I'm not a child. So all in all, I got the impression that this was quite a happy experience for you, because it comes across as something you're passionate about, and it feels like you love your music, obviously, and you love your Doctor Who, and this is a really nice way to pull them together.
Yeah, so the one I did on The Greatest Show, I also managed to sneak a lot of music into from my childhood, and this is the other strand of my childhood music listening, because my dad was a 50s rock and roller, and his music collection was always on in the house. So it's an odd combination of styles to be into, but I always get laughed at because I liked Cliff Richard when he was young. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to write, and the episode itself, that whole first series really grabbed me and went, this is, if I wasn't a Doctor Who fan, I would be watching this show anyway, because it is new and interesting and good. And it was interesting revising the book after series 2, because I hadn't had the same connection with series 2, and so it was like watching this thing written by a very enthusiastic, excited person and going, maybe just calm down there a bit and there, we'll just take that bit out. But on the whole, I do think that RTD's second go at it has been almost better than his first. The whole thing comes together quite nicely, even though something clearly went very wrong towards the end of Shooting Hours era. The experiment was worth doing. It was really good.
Now, you mentioned earlier on your blog. Where can people find this?
It's at dalesmithonline.com, and that's where I put blog posts about everything I've written. And
of course, you can be found on social media on Blue Sky as well.
Yes, Mr. Dale Smith. Oh, actually, that's a lie. It's the website address as well for that one, isn't it? Because Blue Sky do that. Lovely. You can use your website address as a thing. So yes, that's me. Anyway.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with us about the book. Fingers crossed a few more people will be going out to buy it, because I can definitely recommend it. It gets the brain going, as all good Black Archive books do.
Thanks very much.
And a massive thanks to Cousin Dale for that. He's not really my cousin, but we share a surname, so we could well be related somewhere down the line. If you're interested in getting yourself a copy of the book, and I picked a physical copy up down at Hooverville last month, it's very, very good. You can get it from the Obverse Books website. You can go to www.obversebooks.co.uk/78-the-devils, as in a plural with no apostrophe, _chord, /, and it'll be in the show notes as well. It's available for prices between $3.99 and $8.99, and if you want to get a paperback, you can get it for $5.99, and copies are in stock. I did have a good chance to catch up with the Obverse Books team when I was down at the convention, and as ever, there's some fantastic publishing coming out of there, and please do give their website a look. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do feel free to leave us a review on your podcatcher of choice. You can follow us on social media. We have a Twitter feed at Power of 3 Pod with a number 3. We are on Blue Sky at Finished Zine, FINISHEDZINE, and of course we have a Facebook page too. So please do come along like that, and we often share bonus content in there. So it's time to go. We like to play out the tune, and at the author's request, we're going to go with the obvious one to play with, because there's always a twist at the end. I've been Kenny Smith. Bye bye.
There's always a twist, there's always a twist, there's always a twist.